and I want to introduce our panel, which is Samala from Unshackled Ventures and Grace Belangia from Make Startups. So I'll introduce them, and they'll tell you a little bit about what they do.
Hi, good afternoon. Okay, Saturday afternoon slump. Everybody wake up. Good afternoon. You had a good break.
Saturday already.
We're running a minute behind, I think. So we're gonna, yeah.
Just a little bit.
I'm just gonna tell you a little about myself. My name is Grace Belangia. I started an organization called Make Startups about 11 years ago, and we are based. We're nationally based. I'm here in California, and then I have my team in Pennsylvania, Texas, and Georgia. And we really work hard to help entrepreneurs across the country find alternative access to capital. We do that through a lot of programming. We do that through some fellowships. We do run a co-working space. We run an accelerator, an incubator, and I'm a California native and travel the country and talk about sort of what does it look like for entrepreneurs that may not be VC ready, and how do you get access to alternative funding.
See if this mic works. Yes, no?
No.
Does not. Oh, I am.
Okay.
Hello, hello? Nope. I'll borrow yours. Does that work? Yeah, that works a lot better. We'll share one. Hey, everybody, I'm Samala, head of community and culture at Unshackled Ventures. I joined the team about 1.5 years ago. And if just quick, I think he's, out of curiosity, quick show of hands. Does anyone here already know Unshackled Ventures? All right. Shout out to the 3 people. So I'll tell for the rest of you, we're an early stage fund, very focused on pre-seed, and we work with immigrant founders. We like working at day 0, the earlier the better for us, and we actively help with the immigration journey. I would love for more VCs to do this. As far as I know, currently, we're the only ones that really are hands-on. The filings, we have immigration partners, and why we do that is we just very thoroughly believe that immigrant talent is one of our biggest national advantage. People want to come here for school. People want to come here to build. People want to come to this country and like this specific location to build things. And anything we can do to unlock their imaginations, their ambitions, so that the focus be on building and not navigating USCIS, which is very challenging if you have had that experience. I myself, historically have been in your shoes, founder, operator. I've been a founder 6 times, 4 of which were like moderately successful. 1 was pretty good. 1 failed in a not quite spectacular, but like an exciting way. The roller coaster is very familiar to me. And I love being at an early stage fund because I kind of get to be in that mix, but not be the founder anymore. I get to be more the support system for portfolio success and building community with immigrant entrepreneurs. And yeah, I could say a little bit more, but maybe we should save some for the panel. I think we've got a good bunch of people back in the room now. I know we were trying to call folks back in. Any stragglers having coffee outside, please come in now.
Okay, well, let's get into it. So, what specific barriers do underrepresented founders encounter when seeking funding, and how can these barriers be addressed?
I was going to say, I kind of spoke to one very specific one that I work with day to day. And also, I'll just maybe back up for a second and just speak to the fact that there are so many ways to be underrepresented. And my experience was being underrepresented a few ways, being a woman, being brown, being queer. I think the barriers that I personally face and can speak to were just, I'm on the VC side of things now, but when I started my career in entrepreneurship, I was in Philly, I was still an undergrad. It was more years ago than I'm gonna say right now, but it was a while back. My first venture, I didn't meet with a single woman VC. I didn't meet with a single person that wasn't white. And I think that it is a barrier to not see yourself reflected on the other side of the table. That's changed. I'd like for it to change faster. I'd like for it to change more. But It is a barrier, and I think there is a fortitude that one has to cultivate if you don't have it already as an underrepresented founder, that maybe someone who is in what could be described as like the in-group doesn't have that mental, doesn't have that kind of tax on how they're navigating a room, not having to code switch, not having to interrogate or like think about how they're showing up. They could just be. I think I'm fortunate that I've gotten to a place where I'm working with folks where we as VCs are trying to make it as much as possible that people can show up as themselves, but it's not always possible. And I think that is, for me, one of like maybe the biggest mental barriers. There are some other ones as well, but maybe I'll stop there and let Grace chime in too.
Well, I mean, because I've worked with entrepreneurs across the country, I see all walks of life. And when you talk about, like you said, about disadvantage, like I look at it from almost like you can either look at it through like demographics, you can look at it through zip code, you can look at it through industry. And so if you're not in the Silicon Valley bubble, you're not going to have access to the same kind of resources. And those resources are not only financial, they're also like social capital. And so you're disadvantaged because you're not in a community where people are talking about startups or entrepreneurs. Your city, if you're in the heartland, or if you're in other cities that are under resourced, they're not going to have the friends and family that have access to capital. You're not going to see VCs that have that. So there's a real disadvantage, I think, if you're not already in those circles. And so the fact that you're coming in sort of not necessarily behind, but you're not able to be in the same space as those that might have gone to an Ivy League, or they might have parents that are already in the startup or the tech business. And so you actually have a little bit more resilience, which I think you can actually use to your advantage in that space. But I think that the barriers, yes, they may not be as evident to you, but they exist even in just, you go 100 miles out of California, or you go into another city and you don't have access to those same kind of resources.
All right. So how can underrepresented founders leverage their unique perspectives and experiences as strengths in fundraising conversations?
I'll start. So one of the things I've been working with a lot of the entrepreneurs in our program is storytelling. And so a lot of it is sort of, it's not the psychology of it, but really if you were to step back and understand your story and how you're telling your story, whether you're talking about your resilience, whether you're talking about your parents, you're talking about the barriers and how you were able to overcome those, that's great conversation. That's great information that you can talk about, like why you're a founder, why you're an entrepreneur, because you already have the grit to say, like, I've already overcome these other things, and so therefore I'm the right person to start this company. And that's part of your story that the founders want to, the VCs want to hear. Even in the, like when I start talking about alternative access to funding, like when you're writing in your application, you're applying for grants, they want to know like how did you get to the space? And you really want to own that story, and you want to put it in a way that shows that like you have overcome obstacles, you've succeeded, not in a like I'm a victim. It's more like, okay, how can I empower myself and then also help the community with this company that I'm starting?
I do think it's a superpower to be in rooms where people think you shouldn't be, or like are surprised you're there. And I think there's a way to anchor yourself in something that is like absolutely true, in my estimation. If anyone feels differently, I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are. But if you come from a group in some way, shape, or form that isn't super well represented in like mainstream technology, mainstream media, mainstream anything, who better to disrupt and build something better than someone who actually isn't served by the status quo? And that is kind of definitively what innovation is building something new, bringing in something into the fold that wasn't there before. And so I think folks who don't come from backgrounds that we see as much in tech or even VC sometimes, you are best positioned to kind of like bring us towards what's next. Because like, what do you care about what's coming before if it's not serving you, if it wasn't built for you? Build something better, and kind of crush the competition and like wear it as a chip, your perspective. And also, while things are changing in VC, which is amazing, if you find yourself in a position where like you feel unique, maybe like really anchor in that and realize that you have perspective that isn't in the room with you being absent. Like you bring something, insights, information, ideas for a product that maybe only you could bring because of who you are. And being authentic, I think I just want to double down on what was mentioned in terms of storytelling. Share who you are, your journey, like make it clear who you are, why you are, and be authentic. That really, you feel it on the other side of the table. It's the type of thing that, like, especially in the early stages, like what are you going to show for traction? You've got an idea identified. That's awesome. We're curious about you and what you're going to build or what things you've tried to build already. That's what we're gravitating towards. That's what we're assessing in the early stages.
I would say too that a lot of times when I enter a room and I don't know a soul, which I seem to be doing that a lot lately, there is some sort of, and it's not that it's superficial, it's conversational. It's for all the introvert extroverts out there, like to go up to somebody and start a conversation and find something that you have in common with them, because you might at the first level think, I don't look like you don't sound like me, da 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 da. But everybody in here had a mom, everybody had a dad, everybody might have a sibling, everybody went to hopefully elementary, middle, high school. Like there's so many things that we have in common that if you can just like extract that value. I was with somebody the other day having coffee with them, and I didn't know this person at all, and it was very much like the small talk in the beginning. Well, it turns out that her parents were in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia for 20 years, and I have a bunch of friends in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, and then we figured out like, oh, we actually have people in common that we knew. And like you just make that little connection, and all of a sudden you kind of use that as your advantage, because they might not think that they have anything in common with you, and all of a sudden they're like, oh wait, you're quote unquote just like me. Like that's where we can like work together and collaborate. And so you can kind of reduce that barrier of thinking like, oh, I'm the only one that's in this situation. It's like, no, you can find something in common with the people across the table.
Yeah, I think resiliency is something that is really valued in founders on both sides of the table. And somebody who is willing to take on all the extra risks that come along with being an immigrant founder and are so determined on their vision to get it done really speaks volumes. And it's great that you're both giving these people resources to get where they need to. So what are some common misconceptions or myths about fundraising for underrepresented founders, and how can these misconceptions be debunked?
I think the ones that I talk to a lot are they may have a vision of like, oh, I need VC funding, or I just need someone to code this, or I can just figure it out on my own. And in reality, the answer is probably like no. Like you're not VC ready. You probably need more. You don't know what you don't know. And I think that like being able to understand like where it is that you can find those resources so that you can get to the next level.
One that I hear less but do still hear, and I think this is getting debunked, and some of this is because of like the markets and what's going on in the macro environment. But for a while there was this longstanding idea that raise as much money as you could raise and like at big of a valuation as you could raise. I think we have like come to Jesus on this, that this is not a good idea and doesn't necessarily set you or the rest of your cap table up well. But like I think this is actually works great in tandem with you were saying, appropriately capitalize yourself, both with dilutive, non-dilutive funding, and identify which one's going to best serve the strategy as you've identified and laid it out for yourself. We get pitched amazing ideas and have like literally said like, do you need to give up equity to do this? Like would a loan like be a good structure for you? That might be a funny thing to hear from a VC, but think about what type of financing you actually need and how much of it you need, and does it help you get to your next milestone? Like I said, I think there's been some come to Jesus on this, and I see less outrageous valuations. The one outlier is maybe AI, where the valuations are still pretty big or feel pretty big.
Yeah, AI is definitely a bubble. So how do cultural differences impact the fundraising process for underrepresented founders, and what cultural competencies are important to consider?
Go ahead. I feel like we might have already answered that a little bit, but go on.
Maybe just a touch. There's something that was said in the earlier panel that I think might be worth saying like explicitly again in terms of like doing a little bit of homework. Like know who you're speaking with. Armaan, are you thinking like specifically in a VC environment?
Yeah.
Yeah, in a fundraising
Yeah.
environment.
Yeah. Definitely.
You want to be as like, you want to do your diligence too. The VC is going to do theirs. They're already doing theirs. But like, if you can talk to other founders who have had experience with this VC and make sure that they're a good fit and like their value add. At this point, like capital is a commodity. All the other stuff is what's really maybe going to make more of a difference to you. Like their social circles. Who can they give you access to? Do you need help on like more go-to-market strategy, product market fit? What more do you need from your VC? And I think there's an element of that which is a cultural question that requires you to actually know what you need and identify that before you even sit and talk to somebody. For us, there's some things that we see that are interesting. I think being an immigrant fund, people come from different cultural and ethnic backgrounds that have like different norms. And I think that has been a learning for me and awesome. And I'm curious how folks in the room have like navigated this, if they've had to navigate this, how much you bring who you are and like what comes naturally to you versus how much are you acknowledging that you might be engaging in a conversation with someone who might operate differently from you. And how much do you hedge and how much do you like, I don't care. My filter is that like, I'm going to be me and this person is going to gravitate towards that or not. I think cultural competency can really be in service of what you're trying to do if you're really authentic and like understand what you're indexing for in any given moment. Like, are you at a place where your runway is such that you need 150K no matter what? Or are you like, it would be great to raise and I want the right investor? I would advocate for the latter, but yeah, I'd be curious your thoughts on this.
Well, I think that, so when I talk to our founders and they're not quite VC ready and we talk about, some of the differences, again, I go back to like the storytelling, like what are you telling yourself holistically about money? Honestly, like every group, every lived experience that you have with like, how did you come into money? What was your family history with money? Do you have a scarcity mindset with money? Like, how does money move? Money is a tool. It is one solution to moving you along. And then when you talk about how much it is, it's like, yeah, you can all say, you need $1 million, but like you're going to give away your entire company at some point if the valuations are right. Maybe you only need 10,000, maybe you need 20, maybe you need 30,000 every quarter for a year. Like you have to understand like what are you willing to kind of risk in that space? And then the person across the table is going to also have a mindset of like, okay, what's their story when it comes to money? If they're a VC, do you think like, oh, they're rich? It's just out there. They're high risk, high reward. So you want to continue to have the conversation about what does it look like for them to take their money. They're going to trust in you. They're going to invest in you. And then you're going to reciprocate that. So it's almost like when you're interviewing your staff and your founders, you're interviewing your investors because it is a relationship. It would be a disservice to make it completely transactional where you're like, okay, this person is my like personal bank, because that's not really true, because they want something from you. They want 10 or whatever X is for the return. And then you're obliged to continue that relationship. So you want to try really, really hard to make sure that this is like I hate to say it, but it's like, are you dating? Are you engaged? Are you married? Like what happens if you get divorced? Like all of those parallels are with people that have access to money, which is just a tool to help you succeed in your startup.
VCs are on your cap table for a very long time. It's like a marriage. You are financially bound to each other.
Yeah, it's crazy how much of a parallel that is. Actually, so this is a question for Grace specifically. We chatted briefly before the panel, and you mentioned that you help founders, underrepresented founders, figure out what they don't know, or help founders who don't know what they don't know figure out what they need to know. So I was wondering if you could just go into a little bit of detail about that.
Yeah. So so I have two organizations. One's a for-profit and one's a nonprofit, Make Startups. And we run a program. It's a founder fellowship, and we have tied it with a software platform called Co-Founder OS. And it basically is, we called it that way because we literally want it to be your co-founder. And the founder fellowship basically puts you into a program. It can run as long as, as little as a month, as long as you want to participate. And basically it provides the platform, it provides the community, it provides one-on-one, and it provides unlocking resources that are basically funding options. And I can, at a very high level, talk about like whether that's government contracting at the local, state, or federal level, whether it's grants available to you based on your demographics, your industry, your zip code. There's a lot of untapped dollars available for you that are available even though you're running a full-on for-profit company. There's a lot of movement in the philanthropy space with public and private foundations that are trying to help under-resourced entrepreneurs. There's also access to different groups that have money based on their industry sector. So if you're in climate change, or you're in education, or you're in like housing, wanting to solve those kinds of problems, there's grants related to public and private foundations that are related to that. And all of this information comes through our founder fellowship space. In addition to that, if you didn't come from, a rich uncle or friends and family, there are still other available resources financially, whether they're through your conventional banks, which may or may not want to give you small interest loans. There's also CDFIs, which are basically community banks that are obligated to work in the space between small and large loans. And a lot of people don't understand where that is. And so those are resources that are available that can be unlocked should you decide to get into that space. One of the things that I kind of like to pick on sometimes is, again, when I talk to communities nationally about entrepreneurs and startups, they're like, oh, you're running a small business. And I'm like, well, they're also running a new business. And if you would say to like, oh, just go to like, the mayor or the Chamber of Commerce or the Small Business Association, the Small Business Association will probably not work with you financially until you're at least 2 years old. And they probably will only work with you if you're looking for at least $10,000 or $15,000 in a loan. And the definition of a small business in the United States, I think, is any company that's under 500 employees. And so like that is not where, you guys are in like a niche of a niche of a niche. And so finding those other resources is really, really important for you to understand that like it's not just, you can be scrappy all you want, but you're sitting in this room today because you want to find out like how do you get access to funding to help you with your startup.
All right. And I have a question for Samala. So we also chatted really briefly before the panel, and we were chatting about how having a network within the Bay Area or even the US in general really helps because people leverage their networks for warm introductions. So you help people not from the US get into those networks. And my question is, how do you deal with the risk mitigation with overseas companies as you're kind of being this beacon into the American venture capital market?
So one thing to clarify, we invest in mostly American companies. The
Okay.
founders are from abroad.
Okay.
There are a few exceptions, but right now we're mostly investing in American entities. So I want to make sure I'm answering your question correctly of which part you're speaking to.
Yeah. I'm talking about American entities with overseas founders.
And where are you identifying the risk?
It would
what's
just
your
be
question around risk?
It's basically people who don't have a reputation coming in and you being that person putting your reputation on the line for these founders.
Yep, we were talking about social proofing. If you were here for the previous panel, if I spoke to this pretty explicitly, like the warm intro thing, it's real. We're social creatures. If, my new friend Armaan here was like, hey, you should talk to this founder, they're awesome. That's going to register differently than a cold email. I will say that our fund looks at everything that comes in, like 100%. So that is unique to us. I would like for it to be less unique because we acknowledge that not everyone comes with a network and not everyone has a warm intro. For instance, even if I recommend a founder, I'm like, you're awesome, you got to fill out this form. And then there's a process that you'll go through that is the same as everyone else's. But I want to acknowledge that not every VC operates like that. So in the world of, social proofing, who do you know that can and will lend it to you? Or maybe that person isn't in your world yet. How do you find your way to them? Because I think, sure, it'd be a nice idea if social proofing wasn't a thing and wasn't a barrier, but it's not going anywhere. I think we're wired that way as humans. Our biology, we are pack-oriented, tribe-oriented, and we want to know that we could trust the other person on the other side of the table of us, whether it's to break bread or to, talk about a term sheet. So I think things like these are amazing. Meetups are amazing. And don't be afraid to like put yourself out there, like be deeply curious. I think, I could speak to a very specific experience, which is the immigrant founder experience. Folks who have come here to build, or maybe they came here for school, but they want to stay to build a startup, have already demonstrated a lot of the X factor that most VCs look for in a founder. They have a healthy relationship to risk. They can make decisions that are big and are like pretty consequential. You've already demonstrated entrepreneurial spirit by just coming here. You uprooted your life from a homeland, maybe not took your family with you, which means they're either here and you're also responsible for them, or you're still responsible for them and they are thousands or hundreds of miles away. So for us, I think, this idea of risk, or somehow certain people are riskier to invest in, I think that only holds water if you have a certain paradigm, which isn't ours. For us, it's actually, this is a less risky environment. This person is here and they're committed. They're on a visa. There are real constraints and real work and real resources that people, like immigration lawyers, are not cheap. Or they weren't cheap when my family was navigating. I don't think they've gotten cheaper. So someone who is here and building, again, I'm speaking to a specific experience because that's what I know best, that my experience at Unshackled. But yeah, the idea of like who's a risky investment, I think we have a very different idea about that. And like, I think it's a smarter way personally. It's like an immigrant founder isn't going to like drop it after 4 months because they're bored, or because like, you're like, I've got runway, but I want to move on to something else. Like that's just, it doesn't happen.
Right. Their life really depends on it. So how can underrepresented founders negotiate equitable terms and valuations during the fundraising process?
I'm working with a founder now, and he was not born in this country, lived abroad, was not born in this country, came here, lived abroad, and then now came back. And I guess at one level, it is this idea that you pause in your negotiations and understand, like, holistically, like, he doesn't know how to navigate some of these systems. And I think there's enough resources out there that you don't want to be engaged in any sort of predatory practices. But I know for a fact that there are accountants, bankers, lawyers out there that will give you a first look when you're working with these terms, whether they're through another organization or whether they're a third party. Maybe you have to pay a nominal fee, but to have somebody else look at these terms and be able to give you really honest financial feedback, because a lot of that stuff is complicated. It's over their head. They don't know what they're signing away. And so you want to be able to say, like, when you get something, like, give me a deadline and let me shop it around and see if I can get like a third and fourth opinion. That's what I tell a lot of the people that come to me with these things. And I'm like, I don't even know some of these terms. I'm going to help resource you to find somebody who is an expert.
My very blanket answer to this is ask around, ask a lot of questions, find your way to any and all people that will answer this for you. Consult Reddit, see what you can find on Google. I mean, YC in particular, they put their safe documents out there. People use them, people reference them to see what, kind of market is for discounts and how to structure those terms. But founders are usually the single best resource to other founders. That was my experience when I was one, and it seems to still be the experience for our portfolio. Within our portfolio, our founders do ask each other, and I think founders should do it. At VC's back channel, founders should back channel. Get all the information you can and be like forthcoming with it. Like, don't out someone if it's going to put them at risk, but you can say, hey, I talked to someone who is like, and these are the terms, and can you extend these same terms to us? And if you aren't met with respect or a conversation, I think that gives you information that you then are empowered to decide what you want to do with that information. Do you accept the terms as is, or does that give you information about this funder that maybe you want to do something with and make a different decision? The more information you could secure for yourself and find your way to it, even if that means asking another person for help doing that, like, the better position you put yourself in. And I think something that didn't come up as like a underrepresented demographic that I think is important to talk about, because I'm kind of in this one, is first generation undergrad. I happened to be first generation Ivy, which was great. And also I was like, wow, people go to this school and like you just like learn all this stuff. Like deal terms, like the language, the vernacular, the acronyms, a lot of that stuff is meant to be isolating, or it was, and now like way back when, and it's carried over. Flatten that curve as much as you can. Like have pride in the appropriate places. Take pride in your work, especially on the negotiation front. Know what you're not gonna give. Know where you're like the buck stops, where your line is, and like if you're for real about it, don't budge. But also don't have too much pride to ask for help. Any and all help you could find your way to. One of our like a friend of mine who's a founder just like put it on Twitter. Was like, hey, this like top tier firm gave me this term sheet. These are the terms. Didn't put any sensitive information, didn't name anyone, and got a whole bunch of feedback. And they're like, oh yeah, I'm not gonna accept this term sheet. So like, yeah, put your pride in the right place in terms of like what you're worth, know that, be solid in that, but then don't have too much pride to invite all the help you could possibly get.
Yeah, I would say too that having the courage to say, internally to yourself almost that like negotiating is it's a skill. It takes some confidence. Working on a contract is the beginning of a conversation. And so I think it goes both ways, whether you're like hiring somebody or whether they're trying to get you as a customer, like it's all negotiable. Like I think it really, really is. And you want to be flexible in the sense of saying like, okay, these are the term sheets. Let me figure out what I can do and then go back and renegotiate them. I mean, they could say no, or you could leverage yourself. I mean, I tell this to my kids when they're going after jobs because I'm always like, okay, the compensation package is totally different than your salary. And so how are you going to negotiate that? And they're like, oh, I don't want to offend them. I'm like, no, they're expecting you. They're expecting you to like push back and like give them a different number. I mean, that's what this all is. This is all part of a conversation.
I think thinking of it as a conversation can be really freeing. I also think, I don't know how many people are first-time founders. Something that I like learned on the job being the founder job, I also had to learn my style of negotiation, which was really, I didn't like negotiating. So for me, the way that I went to these conversations was to say like, hey, I just want to share like what I could do and where my hard lines are. And I would just like to have ideally 1 or 2 conversations to see if this works. And like, if it goes beyond that, this probably isn't right for me. It took me a little while to get there, but I do think this conversational piece is tremendously helpful, but also just like know what your style is and like maybe practice it a little bit. Like I know role playing can sound a little silly, but if this is something that's hard for you, like pushing back or asking for like what you want and what you probably deserve, practicing it does help.
And if they say yes right away, that means you left money on the table.
That part.
I learned that the hard way. It's like, oh, I should ask for more.
Cool. Thank you for answering this question. So now I'd like to open up for Q&A with the audience. If anybody has any questions for the panel.
I know we were running a little bit behind, so if you have to get up and go, we totally understand, but we can stay for a little while and answer some questions.
Is it Somalia?
Samala.
Samala. Hey, 2 questions. And it may be dumb, but I just want to know.
In the no dumb questions camp, so go for it.
Okay, good. 1, do you only work with immigrants? And 2, would I be considered an immigrant? Because I would love to work with your company.
So we do ideally work with teams where at least one member of the founding team is an immigrant. And for us, it's just because we're most valuable. If there isn't someone on the team who's an immigrant, there very likely is another fund that could best service and like collaborate. So that is one of our requirements, and early stage. In case folks in the room are immigrant founders and actively raising, our sweet spot is a $200K to $400K check. We like to lead. There truly is no such thing as early. I know that's like a thing that gets said a lot, but we really mean it. A lot of founders will incorporate alongside with our investment, in part because we're also navigating their immigration. Armaan and I actually talked about this a little bit just before the panel of, he had his own situation where a hopeful co-founder ended up not being the co-founder because they were on an H-1B visa, which meant that their employer was sponsoring them, and so they couldn't leave full time. And ultimately was not Armaan's co-founder and CTO. It worked out all right, but that's like one of the exact situations that we're trying to like spare people from, is trying to figure out how to stay here and like have work authorization because that is a lot of time and energy and money that should be going to building.
Yeah, I mean, I can go in a little bit of detail about that. So, yeah, I had a co-founder we were dating with that was from overseas, and immigrants from overseas take on an extreme amount of risk versus founders that are here, for the fact that they have a family to feed. If they're not completely compliant with USCIS, they're done, and that's it. So the problem was someone taking a third of the company and not being able to join until they're at a point where they can change their visas to one that they can work on a startup with. Well, the rest of the team basically de-risks the company and goes and fundraises without that person being on the team. Didn't seem fair, and it basically ended with an impasse, and we went our separate ways. And it was pretty unfortunate. So I'm glad people like Samala and Grace are helping out, solving these issues.
So when I have an immigrant founder, I'm going to send them to you.
Yes, please.
Will do.
As long as they're early in the journey, when people start raising, like $2 million rounds and up, like an entering seed, they're getting pretty late for us.
Yeah.
We truly are like at inception. Frankly, we operate a lot like a friends and family round, because some kind of the stuff that we were talking about. If you come here, maybe a dozen people, may know 2 dozen. Unclear if any of them have the capacity to like help you in the early stages. So we end up being that first check.
Are you
a lot of the
industry
time.
agnostic?
We are a generalist fund. Some things that we don't touch are like hardware, life sciences, things that require pretty specific knowledge and are a longer exit horizon usually. And also other funds do that well.
Mhm.
But we've got some consumer. We've got a company from our first fund, which is 9.5 years ago, an AI company from 9.5 years ago. It's doing
Wow.
tremendously well. Climate. So yeah, like honestly, anything that isn't hardware and like huge CapEx.
Fair enough. I'm sorry, she's been waiting.
Go ahead.
Apologize. We
It's
went on a
okay.
little bit of a tangent.
I've been encountering an interesting cultural barrier in that I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Detroit, and no one really has, I guess, seen startup success, and so they're very hesitant. So even if there's like someone who might be an angel investor, like they have enough money to be, they know you well, they're just very risk averse. And like I think it's that, like in this area, most of the companies, buildings we see around, like they started as startups here, like so people see the success. But I guess where I'm from, like people just don't see that, so it's much harder to show that I can do this, it can work, help me.
Yeah.
So do you have any advice on
I
that?
mean, at the high level, and I don't know if you're based in Michigan or if your product is in Michigan.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, like you're a woman. There's a lot of female angels. There's a lot of female funds. There's not as many VCs as we would like, but I think you could leverage that regardless of where you are. I do know for a fact that there's a Michigan fund, and I don't know if you're familiar with that at all. It's in partnership with the state, and they are specifically funding startups in Michigan. And so I think, they were at South by last week called Michigan House, and it's like a whole movement for the Midwest. So they went in with like Indiana and Iowa and Illinois and Wisconsin. So I'm, happy to make a connection for you off site. I think that working with any academic institutions, most universities are either launched an entrepreneur center or they have some sort of fund for students. If you're alumni or you're co-founder or you're across the street, like you can access the academic world. They'll have like a commercialization office. If you're an alumni, you can go back to your university. And I think again, that goes back to like your social capital. Like even if there's not money, there's going to be connections there. And then I know just like at the federal level, There's a lot of money that was deployed back into the Detroit area over the last decade just for revitalization. And there's a trend that I have seen with the movement in the electric vehicle space. And so you're taking a lot of talent that was in Detroit before, and they're moving into electrical vehicles, electrical transportations. And so there's money moving in that space as well. So those are just a few top of mind
Cool.
ideas.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll definitely connect with you.
Hi. I love your thesis and value proposition, by the way, at Unshackled.
Thank you. I wish I could take credit. I joined a year and a half ago, but I feel very lucky for where I am.
Fantastic. And thank you for all the incredible comments as well. I guess my question is, how do you get funded? Like, what are typically the kinds of people that put money in your fund?
That's a great question. So we raised our third fund very recently, and just quick raise of hands, like us specifically, or just like in general? Us specifically. So I'll give you like a little bit of the trajectory, which was initially it was a lot of individuals that were the LPs in our fund. At Fund 3, we've grown to a space where they're now more institutional. There's actually this really amazing story to tell that I won't make you suffer through, but you could Google it. The United States Treasury put out a couple $2 billion in the past few years to try and get more underrepresented fund managers deploying capital, to hope that would have good downstream effects. Unshackled was the first VC in the state of California to get money from the state of California as a part of this larger Treasury program. So that's one of our limited partners, is the state of California. It's the first time that the state of California has participated in a VC fund.
Can I just pause for a sec? So here is it a perfect example of where a government entity is trickling down, working with other organizations. So like you couldn't go to the US Treasury, but the US Treasury at the end of the day, like that's our dollars moving through the system at the federal level, and it's tracking down to agencies like hers.
And if folks don't know about it, it's called SSBCI. I cannot remember for the life of me what the acronym is. You're nodding your head, maybe you know. But maybe it's worth checking out if Michigan is participating in this, because they are doing it state specific.
Mhm.
Back to your question, there are a lot of family offices, single family offices, multifamily offices, we do still have high net worth individuals, but we're following kind of a typical trajectory for a young-ish fund, where you start with people who have the capacity to be investors in a fund, and as subsequent funds are raised, you get more and more institutional investors. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much. I guess one more follow-up. Is it also because of the performance of the portfolio of your companies, right? Because typically they would.
We're performing better than our peers being funds of a similar size and stage. And this has been actually really amazing to see 9 years in. Some of the very first investments are starting to mature, and the thesis from 9.5, well, probably more like 11 years ago, because the fundraising started before the fund closed. So like over a decade ago, the thesis was investing in immigrant founders is a really good bet. And the earlier you do it, the better you do it. And actually that's where there's more value to be added, because if you're not working with immigrant founder at the very beginning, we've already lost them. You've gone back to a home country, or you've gotten absorbed into a massive existing organization. We've lost that founding talent. Maybe they'll come back in a decade when they've got a green card. We are now starting to see that that is absolutely true. And I will also share that not only are we as a fund performing better than our peers, the women in our fund, if we take Fund 1 alone, 2 women of color, immigrants, are very much driving the multiplier on that one. And it's actually true in our younger funds as well. So good news.
Go women.
Yeah. So women entrepreneurs, immigrant women of color are performing very well.
Women co-founders.
They are women co-founders, actually, the ones who are doing really, really well right now.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You can give it back to the guy behind you.
Thank you for the pass.
Thank you very much. That was very amazing. One question. One thesis that I keep hearing is that you can skip one round of fundraising at earlier stage, and then you get to the next one, and you haven't practiced enough, and you'll fail. So, like, not fail, but it's harder to get. It's getting harder and harder each round you go up. And it seems like I'm an immigrant, so I appreciate something like this. But it seems like a shortcut, not a shortcut, but something that helps the underrepresented like people. But then how do you prepare them for the next round? Because now they kind of like went around. We don't have as many connection as many other people who lived in this country forever, and you're helping them. But then next round it's gonna be the same thing, but they are not prepared for it. Only it's harder. So how do you prepare the immigrants and people you're supporting for that next round?
I don't know if this is going to directly answer your question, but I'll give it a go anyways, and you could ask a clarifying one if this doesn't do it. So a lot of the kind of conventions around the funding rounds have gone a little sideways, or have like the paths have diverged a little bit. It used to be really straightforward a decade, even longer ago. It's like raise your pre-seed, your seed, your A, B, and so on and so forth. You get like seed extensions, A prime. It like the letter number thing, I think sometimes matters, sometimes doesn't. And what you're speaking to, the phenomenon, some people raise 4 to 5 pre-seed rounds because they're doing it in tranches. Some people only ever raise 1 pre-seed round because they raise a massive one and that's all they need. And they might even skip a seed. So I think what used to be perceived of as a linear nature in fundraising and capitalizing, it's still there, but I don't think it holds as true as it used to. In terms of how to prepare founders, I mean, I think the best preparation is get a handle on, what's your burn? How much do you need? And are you good at managing your cash flow? And are you good at fundraising? Or is that something you need to find talent for, either in a co-founder or someone else on your team to help with that? I think knowing if that's a skill set of yours or not is like really important. I do think typically the way it works is there's a more technical co-founder and there's a more kind of like sales or biz dev type person, and that dynamic works really well. And I think the last thing I'll say in terms of, raising rounds, it is partially a muscle. So if you go more than 18 months, 24 months without raising, you might need to build your muscle back up and you might spurn some energy doing that. Also, raising in a somewhat regular, predictable cadence just keeps you top of mind with investors, both who are existing on your cap table or investors who maybe you started conversations with and weren't a fit for stage or something, but maybe you're relevant now. So I think it's less about like the preparation, maybe part of your question that I'm speaking to, and more just like that muscle and that cadence helps you stay top of mind and also keeps you sharp and also keeps you talking about what you're building and what you're doing. So in addition to staying top of mind, you're also hearing what things are landing. You're iterating your story and your storytelling, like Grace was talking about, and learning along the way of like, oh, this is really resonating, so I'm going to keep on saying this. Or like, this didn't quite work. Let me tweak that and try that again. Oh, this works better there.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I mean, LinkedIn is this interesting, I have a love-hate relationship with it, right? So like you can sort of find people, but then if you communicate, then it kind of like falls off. And so I think maintenance is actually a really good word. It goes back to kind of your storytelling. So if you reach out to people at like the super early stages and maybe you heard like, no, maybe, yes. Okay, the people that said maybe didn't say no. And there's a whole bunch of people that never even replied. And so it's like, yes, no, not now. And so you have to go back until they literally tell you, go away, leave me alone. And then as you build your thing, if you're getting to like a second or third, you can go back to those conversations. You now have this experience that you can leverage that you didn't have when you started. And so that's part of your storytelling. You're like, yeah, 3 years ago we were here, now we're here. And so you actually have more data and evidence to say like, okay, this is actually working. And as you build that up, you're opening up more networks. So it's not that it's narrowing, that you have less at the top. You're actually opening it up more because the more, I don't want to say prestigious, but the higher network is like a higher frequency. So it's a higher caliber. And so you should be able to, with the leverage that you have from your history of saying like, this is where I was 3 years ago, this is where I am now, this is what's working, this is what's not working, that might be like, oh, okay, so you did pitch those milestones. Oh, okay, so you did get that traction. Oh, you pivoted. Oh, okay, let me think about it again. And so I don't think you ever want to kind of discount that unless it's like so obvious that like you are not in their thesis, you're not in their financial window. You can become more optimistic about every rejection or every ghost or every maybe. You see what I mean? And I think that'll, again, it'll build your confidence. This is hard work, you guys. I mean, you're up for a lot of rejection, and you need to sort of flip the story in your head when somebody's like, nah, then be like, okay, I'm going to come back to you.
Something that I'll share in the spirit of hopefully it's helpful, because it took me a while to like learn this, and I like am actively coaching some founder friends through this as well. Try to take, even though it's so personal, like you're building something, you're losing sleep over it, maybe like a tear was shed, like it's hard. You're really putting yourself out there. But as much as you can in the fundraising process, depersonalize the lack of reply or a no, and try to just be like a mercenary sales pipeline manager. And this is like a very tactical thing, and maybe a useful way to address your question is track these conversations. If you've got a CRM, cool. If not, just a spreadsheet, sure. But like, do keep track of who you've had conversations with, and maybe some light notes about what you said, what they are really into and what they seem to be really turned off by. And like, keep that pretty well maintained, because it'll help you in your fundraising. It'll help you prioritize. If you do the thing where like, it's just a sales funnel. I've got like 200 people, I'm going to make asks, and I need like 10% of them to like be curious and convert some other percent. I'm making up numbers. Don't go by these numbers. But yeah.
Blatant plug here. That's what our co-founder OS does. It helps you document those conversations, and then you can come back to them.
Just to add to that, it's no. And I was dealing with this pretty recently. So, there's a lot of conflicting advice on no means no from an investor, and other people say, like, just keep updating them. So I got a lot of no's, and I built a spreadsheet with all the investors that I'd reached out to that I still really wanted to keep a conversation with. As we kept progressing, I just kept blasting out updates as where the company is going. And all of a sudden I started getting texts back like, hey, like, great progress, like, come to this event with me. And then things start warming up. So in many cases, it's hard to tell. In some cases, like with you say, where they're literally like, get away from me, then yeah, like, take the hint. But if they, if they're silent, like, just keep going for it. Put them on an update list. Just send them updates, and you'd be surprised when people turn around.
Also, it's maybe helpful to keep in mind that VCs get pitched every day, all day. And like, sometimes it genuinely is just a staying top of mind thing. I know it's not ideal and it could feel deeply personal. And sometimes it's just like the day that you ping them, they didn't have the bandwidth. Maybe generally not interested, but like, I wouldn't be shy. Most of the VCs I know will tell you if there's something that they want to tell you about stopping. So I think, just staying top of mind is, I am genuinely grateful when someone is just like, hey, just bumping this in case it got lost in your inbox. I'm like, yes, that absolutely got lost in my inbox. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions from the audience?
When you're talking to folks and they talk about early stage, does that mean an MVP, a Figma, or just idea? Or is it a variety of stages within or phases within early stage that people consider, that
I mean, most
accelerators consider?
Yeah, most of the entrepreneurs that we work with are past the idea stage. Like, I think there's a level of which, like, okay, are you a entrepreneur? Like you're not going to quit your day job, or you don't want to put any of your own money into this, or you're just trying to find like, other people just to write you like a blank check. Like, you have to have some skin in the game. And it's a disservice to string someone along who's like, I got so many ideas. I was like, okay, well, let's help you narrow that down and see like, okay, what are the behaviors and the actions behind that? Because I think we all have tons of ideas, and and the hardest thing I have is sometimes I find entrepreneurs that are very mission oriented, they're very social impact focused, and I have to like burst the little bubble, and I'm like, there's no money in that. Like that's a nonprofit or that's a hobby. And like you have to like you're in the business of creating a business, and so a lot of times you have to ask those really hard questions to say, like, oh, okay, so that's how you can monetize it. That's the business. That's social impact. That's great. Mission driven. That's great. But there's a lot of ways that, and I don't know if you do this, but when I'm with somebody who hasn't even gotten to like that product or that service, I have to be like, oh, okay, this is a hard lift. I'm going to need you to like give this a second or third thought. So that's at least the ones I work with.
When I use the term early stage, it's early revenue or just on the cusp, pre-revenue, and anything that comes before that is what I consider early stage.
All right, I think we're running low on time, right? You have to jet at 2:50.
I did. I thought I would be able to stay, but unfortunately,
There's a
the
parade going
bump-
on, so just
Yeah.
Aaron
Be aware of
Gobra,
that.
if anyone's Irish. But yeah, I'm really easy to find on LinkedIn. Sometimes my inbox is crazier than others, but I'm pretty easy to find, and really appreciate everyone for your time, and good luck to all of you building.
yeah. Thank you. Reach out to us.
Yeah, thank you so much to our panelists. Thanks for taking time out of your day and sharing some wisdom. So, yeah, great to meet you as well. Great. Thanks, everybody.